"You are a servant, not a success," my father mocked, his voice echoing through the narrow hallway of our home with an utterly crushing weight. He stood there, arms crossed, absolutely amused by my desperate pleading. Right then, my mother forcefully slammed my bedroom door shut and turned the heavy brass lock, trapping me inside the dimly lit space. Through the thin wood, I could hear my younger sister Colette toss her massive designer luggage onto the hardwood floor. "Babysit my 3 kids," she snapped, her tone entirely devoid of empathy. "I am traveling." They wanted me to remain their unpaid maid forever, a silent ghost haunting the halls of their perfect lives. So I shattered the window glass, climbed out into the freezing morning air, and disappeared completely. They thought they had absolutely ruined me, but they were profoundly wrong. Today, I am the immensely wealthy chief executive officer of the exact company she so desperately needs a job from. Thank you for watching this video. Before I take you back there, do me one small favor. Take a second to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. It helps more than you know. My name is Nadine. I am 31 years old. For the first 24 years of my existence, I was not treated as a daughter, but rather as an entirely disposable asset meant to blindly serve the family empire. We lived in Marietta, Georgia, in a sprawling brick estate where the manicured lawns hid the profound rot festering inside our walls. On paper, my family was the absolute picture of Southern success. My father, Thaddeus, owned Thaddeus Logistics and Freight, a highly profitable mid-sized transportation company. My mother, Sybil, was the quiet architect of our social standing. And then there was Colette. Colette was the golden child, the undeniable royalty of our household. While she spent her days lounging by the country club pool and collecting wealthy boyfriends, I spent mine trapped in a windowless office. By the time I was 22, my life was an endless, grueling cycle of unpaid labor. I worked 40 hours a week at my father's freight company, handling all the logistics, managing the complex dispatch schedules, and balancing the sprawling accounting books. Then, I would drive home to work another 30 hours a week babysitting Colette's 3 children while she pursued whatever fleeting, expensive hobby had caught her eye. I generated massive value for our family, yet I slept in a converted storage room and owned absolutely nothing. When I finally gathered the courage to ask my father for a meager paycheck, his face hardened into a mask of sheer contempt. "I do everything for this family," I whispered, my voice trembling under his heavy gaze. "I need a salary." "Family does not pay family," Thaddeus sneered, waving his hand dismissively. "That is your duty." I was completely suffocated. But in the quiet, icy hours of the night, while the rest of the Golden Empire slept, I began to build my escape. Using a battered, second-hand laptop, I secretly taught myself corporate management, relentlessly studying the intricate mechanics of business operations. Over the course of 12 agonizing months, I applied to hundreds of distant roles, throwing my resume into the dark void of the internet. Finally, a blinding ray of hope pierced through my bleak reality. Apex Innovations Group, a massive corporate conglomerate located 2 hours away in Atlanta, offered me a final, in-person interview for a highly coveted management track position. The salary was staggering. The benefits were life-changing. It was my only ticket out. I hid $15 under my mattress for the bus fare, borrowed a slightly oversized navy suit from a distant friend, and mentally prepared to claim my freedom. The morning of the interview, the sky was a heavy, suffocating gray. I stood in the hallway, clutching my cheap portfolio, my heart hammering fiercely against my ribs. That was when Colette barged through the front door, trailing 3 screaming toddlers and 2 massive suitcases. She looked at my suit, her lips curling into a sneer of pure disgust. "Watch them," Colette demanded, tossing a heavy diaper bag directly at my feet. "I am going to Miami." "I cannot," I replied, my voice remarkably steady despite the sheer panic rising in my throat. "I have a crucial appointment in Atlanta." Colette's face contorted with entirely unhinged rage. She screamed for our parents, playing the ultimate victim. Within seconds, my mother and father descended the stairs, forming an impenetrable wall of authority. Sybil's eyes were completely cold, devoid of any maternal warmth. Without a single word, my mother shoved me backward into my tiny bedroom and violently turned the lock from the outside. I pounded on the wood, begging for my one chance at a real life, but Thaddeus only laughed. That was when he delivered the line that completely shattered my remaining illusions of family. He told me I was a servant, not a success. I stopped pounding. An utterly frozen silence settled over my mind. The terrified, obedient daughter died in that cramped room, replaced by a woman made of pure, unyielding ice. I grabbed my heavy desk chair and swung it directly into the bedroom window. The glass absolutely crumbled, raining down onto the dewy grass below. I climbed through the jagged frame, tearing the fabric of my borrowed suit and slicing my palms on the sharp edges. I did not look back. I bled silently as I walked 3 miles to the station, boarded the bus to Atlanta, and left the Golden Empire behind forever. I arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Apex Innovations Group completely exhausted, physically bruised, but radiating an absolutely sheer determination. I sat in that sleek boardroom and delivered the most brilliant, flawless interview of my entire life. The executives were profoundly impressed by my deep operational knowledge, entirely unaware that I had gained it by running a freight company for free. I left that building feeling invincible. I slept on a friend's lumpy couch for a week, eagerly waiting for the offer letter that would officially begin my new life. 8 days later, the email arrived. I opened it with trembling fingers, only to feel my entire world completely shatter. It was a cold, generic rejection. They had decided to move in another direction. I sat on the floor of that tiny apartment and wept until my lungs physically ached. I believed I was entirely worthless, a permanent failure destined to scrub floors and serve others. I spent the next year working grueling shifts as a waitress, barely surviving, completely cut off from the family that had abandoned me. Little did I know, the trap that destroyed my one chance had been set from inside my own home. But a predator does not stay wounded forever. Slowly, deliberately, I rebuilt my life. 1 year later, I applied to Apex Innovations Group again, this time starting at the absolute bottom as a lowly data entry clerk. I worked with an icy, terrifying focus. I outworked everyone, outsmarted my superiors, and ruthlessly climbed the corporate ladder. I devoured every project, streamlined massive operational inefficiencies, and transformed entire struggling departments into highly profitable divisions. Over the course of 7 years, I evolved from a broken runaway into a corporate titan. Through a series of aggressive mergers and brilliant strategic maneuvers, I was ultimately named the Chief Executive Officer of the entire organization. I had an immense corner office overlooking the glittering Atlanta skyline, a staggeringly large stock portfolio, and a deeply peaceful, perfectly structured life. I had one. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning, the prey wandered blindly into my territory. I was reviewing the final shortlist of candidates for a highly lucrative senior project director position when a specific name made my blood completely freeze. Colette. My eyes darted across the digital resume, taking in the absolutely sheer audacity of her lies. Under her work experience, she had listed herself as the senior operations manager of Thaddeus Logistics and Freight for the exact years I had been trapped in that house. She had entirely stolen my labor, my exact accomplishments, and my undeniable metrics, pasting them onto her own fraudulent application to mask a 7-year gap of doing absolutely nothing. For her primary reference, she listed our father. My mask of corporate indifference slipped, revealing a perfectly cold, calculating predator beneath. I did not immediately reject her. Instead, a profound suspicion gnawed at the edges of my memory. As the Chief Executive Officer, I possessed unlimited, unrestricted access to the deepest archives of the corporate server. I typed my own name into the legacy human resources database, pulling up the file from my failed interview 7 years ago. There, buried under layers of digital dust, was a federal compliance flag. Attached to it was an anonymous email sent directly to the hiring committee the exact morning after my window escape. I read the words, and my heart turned to absolute stone. The email claimed I was a deeply unstable, violent individual who had violently abandoned my helpless nieces and nephews during a manufactured family crisis. It warned the company of severe liability if they hired me, citing a fabricated history of theft and profound mental illness. It was a completely devastating, expertly crafted character assassination. I forwarded the message to my elite cybersecurity team with a single directive: trace the origin. Within an hour, they handed me a verified, indisputable IP address. The email had not been sent by a concerned neighbor. It had been sent from the private wireless network inside my parents' estate, specifically from a device registered to Sybil. My own mother had intentionally, maliciously sabotaged my only escape route to ensure I would be forced to crawl back and serve her golden child. The sheer betrayal was staggering, but I did not cry. Tears are for the weak, and I was holding a devastating corporate arsenal. The narrative had reached the ultimate tipping point. I was no longer a victim. I was the executioner, and the statutory trap was set. I picked up my secure office line and dialed Thaddeus Logistics and Freight. My father answered, his voice dripping with the same arrogant authority I remembered. I did not announce my identity. I introduced myself simply as the hiring verification liaison for Apex Innovations. I pressed the recording button on my console, fully compliant with state consent statutes, and began the interrogation. "Can you verify the employment history of Colette?" I asked, my voice utterly frozen, stripped of any familiar inflection. "Absolutely," Thaddeus boomed, completely unaware of the legal snare tightening around his neck. "Colette was our senior manager. She single-handedly ran our entire operational dispatch for 3 years. She is a brilliant, entirely indispensable asset." "So, she was the sole manager during that specific time frame?" I pressed, securing the perjury. "Yes," he lied, effortlessly erasing my entire existence. "She was the only one." I ended the call, saving the digital audio file directly to the encrypted corporate server. I then instructed my executive assistant to send Colette an exclusive invitation for a final, in-person interview with the senior board of directors. 2 days later, the golden child strutted into the massive, glass-enclosed boardroom on the top floor of the Apex Tower. Colette was dripping in cheap, counterfeit designer clothing, her face painted with a sickeningly arrogant smile. She sat across from 3 of my senior vice presidents, eagerly waiting to charm her way into a 6-figure salary. She had absolutely no idea that the empire she was trying to infiltrate belonged to the servant she had thrown a diaper bag at 7 years ago. The heavy mahogany doors slowly opened. I walked into the room wearing an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. I took the seat at the absolute head of the long table, interlacing my fingers as I stared directly into her eyes. Colette's smug expression entirely shattered. All the color violently drained from her face, leaving her looking like a terrified, cornered animal. Her jaw dropped, and a pathetic, trembling squeak escaped her lips. "Nadine," she whispered, her facade completely crumbling under the sheer weight of my presence. "Welcome to Apex Innovations, Colette," I said, my voice radiating an icy, terrifying authority. "I am the Chief Executive Officer. Let us thoroughly discuss your impressive resume." For 20 agonizing minutes, I professionally and ruthlessly dismantled her. I demanded complex, granular details about the logistics protocols she claimed to have optimized. I threw highly technical supply chain scenarios at her, watching with profound satisfaction as she stammered, sweated, and entirely humiliated herself in front of my elite executive team. She could not answer a single fundamental question. She was entirely exposed as a profound fraud. When the vice presidents finally excused themselves, leaving us completely alone in the sprawling glass room, Colette immediately resorted to her ancient, pathetic tactics. She began to violently sob, loudly weaponizing her tears. "You have to give me this job, Nadine," she shrieked, slamming her fists against the expensive mahogany. "You owe this family. I am drowning in debt, and you are sitting up here acting like a queen. You have to help me." I did not move a single muscle. I reached into my leather portfolio and slid 2 pieces of paper across the vast table. The first was the transcript of my father's recorded perjury, legally verifying her blatant corporate fraud. The second was the printed email from Sybil, the documented proof of their malicious defamation. Colette stared at the documents, her eyes wide with sheer terror as the full magnitude of her legal liability finally dawned on her. "You are not being rejected because you are my sister," I stated, my voice echoing with absolute finality. "You are being permanently blacklisted across the entire industry because you are a liability, a forgery, and an utter failure." Colette completely lost her mind. She sprang from her chair, her face contorted with the exact same unhinged rage from 7 years ago. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are nothing. You are just a servant. You will always be our servant." I simply stared at her, entirely unbothered, and reached out to press a small, blinking silver button on the central console. "Security," I commanded into the live microphone, which had been broadcasting her entire unhinged, defamatory meltdown directly to the corporate legal department in the adjacent room. "We have a hostile trespasser in the executive suite. Escort her off the premises immediately and process the permanent ban protocol." The heavy doors swung open instantly. 2 massive, heavily armed corporate security officers stepped inside, their expressions completely grim. They flanked Colette, gripping her arms with professional, unyielding force. She thrashed and screamed, her designer knockoff heels dragging pathetically across the pristine marble floor as they physically hauled her out of my empire. Her pathetic cries echoed down the hallway until the elevator doors finally clamped shut, silencing her forever. I sat alone in the quiet boardroom, looking out over the sprawling city, feeling a profound, absolute peace settle over my soul. 3 weeks later, I sat in my corner office, watching the rain wash the city clean. My elite legal counsel had swiftly delivered aggressive, federally backed cease and desist orders to Thaddeus, Sybil, and Colette. Any attempt to contact me, approach my properties, or utter my name in a public forum would result in immediate, devastating civil litigation for profound defamation and corporate harassment. The Golden Empire had been entirely neutralized by a single sheet of legal paper. They were completely terrified of my wealth, my lawyers, and my absolute willingness to destroy them in a court of law. I never received an apology, but I did not need one. However, yesterday evening, a completely unexpected notification appeared on my private, heavily filtered social media account. It was a direct message from my eldest niece, Colette's daughter, who is now 12 years old. "Aunt Nadine," the message read. "Thank you for the secret birthday books you send every year. Mom hates them, but I hide them in my closet. I read about you in a business magazine. You are my hero. I want to be just like you when I grow up." I smiled, a genuine, quiet warmth blooming in my chest. I typed a brief, encouraging reply, offering her a future internship when she was old enough to escape her own toxic environment. I have built an incredible, staggeringly beautiful life entirely on my own terms. I have accumulated wealth, immense power, and a profound sense of self-worth that no amount of their arrogant, petty manipulation could ever buy, steal, or break. Thank you for staying until the very end. Have you ever had to walk away from a highly toxic family dynamic to save your own life and sanity? Have you ever had to become the villain in their narrative to become the hero in your own? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to channel, and I will see you in the next story.